Welcome to the Gold Newsletter Podcast, your bank of knowledge of investment, economics, and geopolitics. Go to goldnewsletter.com for our publications and archives.
This is the Gold Newsletter Podcast. Fergus Hodgson, your host, joined by my co-host, Brian London today. And we have one of our old favorites, 𝗀𝗂𝗍𝗂 on. And I should say that 𝗀𝗂𝗍𝗂, when he dialed up this morning, the voice is so reminiscent because I used to listen to him and to Harry Browne almost 20 years ago when I was a college student. So Doug, mate, you've had an impact on my life in that regard. He is an author many times over, a world-renowned speculator, and he's the founder of internationalman.com. Doug, we just see a recent article from you is how fascism comes to America. So welcome, and I guess we will go straight to the heat of the meat. What is this story?
Well, depends on when we want to start the story.
Yeah.
You know, the U.S. has been ascending economically for 100 years. Actually, since its founding, things have gotten better and better. But actually, since World War I, well, it's hard to pick an arbitrary point, but all over the world, not just in the US, government has gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. People forget that 100 years ago, the income tax didn't exist anywhere. In fact, almost any taxes, except import duties, didn't exist anywhere. Gold was money. There was no inflation. The world, despite the fact that technology has been compounding at the rate of Moore's law, and that's wonderful. I'm a tremendous technophile. It's great. It'll mean that with a little bit of luck, we'll colonize the moon and the planets and the asteroids in the next couple of generations. So there have been wonderful things that have been happening. We all have refrigerators and air conditioners and cars, and this is great. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the state of freedom in the world at large and the US in particular. I say the US because America no longer exists. America was a concept, a unique concept, but America is dead and buried at this point. Over the last 100 years, personal freedom has gone down and down and down. You know, 100 years ago, the income tax didn't exist anywhere in the world. In fact, the only taxes there were basically import duties. Inflation didn't exist. Gold was used for money, and money wasn't a political football. People don't realize as they bow down before the people they elect, because they think we have a democracy, and they think that's a good thing. Actually, it's not a good thing, and I can explain why later. That'll shock a lot of people. But one thing about this current coronavirus hysteria is that it's acted as the pin to break the bubble, the biggest bubble in history, biggest financial bubble in history. And the Greater Depression is now going to wash over our shores and take away what little is left of your personal freedom, because people have been programmed to think that the government is the answer to all their problems, that it's a cornucopia. So they want more government, not less government. So this is really scary. Yeah, fascism's coming to not America. Like I said, America's gone. It's coming to the US, which is the horrible substitute for the America that's left us. Remember, America's a concept.
Doug, I totally agree with you. It seems like this coronavirus, this pandemic, is bringing about your long predicted collapse of Western civilization to some degree, or it's strengthened it to some degree in that governments are seizing more power. You know, we've seen this emergency create more or expose more petty tyrants around the country. They're popping up like mushrooms after a rainstorm, trying to enforce all sorts of different orders and restricting travel and human liberty and the like. But I've been encouraged by some blowback against that, some pushback against that. Have you seen that? Are you encouraged that maybe there's a resistance that we didn't appreciate still, that there's some backbone in the American populace?
Not really. I think that people are fighting back, not because they believe in personal freedom so much as because they're tired of being locked up and they're tired of being inconvenienced. In other words, there's really no principles involved in this at all. Look, I can believe, but I'm just shocked at how the average American rolled over like a whipped dog and wet himself as soon as they said that this virus, which is mostly hysteria, it depends on how you crunch the numbers, but it's about as deadly as a normal seasonal flu. And it was never a big deal. The big deal are the second order effects, what they've done to the economy, and more important than that are the third order effects, what the government is going to do reacting to what's happened to the economy. That's going to be with us for a long time. So I'm not optimistic. We're still we entered the Greater Depression back in 2008. And then we went through the eye of the storm, if you use my analogy of a giant hurricane. Now we're going into the trailing edge. And we're still at the very beginning of this. It's going to get much worse.
You are and maintain that you're an optimist. And I've always appreciated that about you, because you are essentially an anarchist, and an anarchist has to have utopian view of the world and human nature, and I guess has to be optimistic at their core. But you also, in your recent article, listed 3 reasons for pessimism, and I'd like to try and cover those. The first one you listed was debt, which is something we've all been preaching on for so many years. But it's hard to imagine that just a couple of months ago, the debt was about $22.5 trillion. And at that point, it was out of control. And today it's about $25 trillion. The deficit's going to be conservatively estimated at $3.5 trillion this year. It's just mind-boggling, the differences and from where we were just a few weeks back and where we are today. How does the debt enter into your prognosis for the future of the United States and the future of personal liberty?
Well, debt is very important, because when you have savings, it means that you've produced more than you've consumed, and you've put that aside in savings. When you have debt, it's saying that you're consuming more than you produced, and you're borrowing the difference. If we borrowed $1 million right now, we could live very high off the hog for the next year, artificially high. But when we have to pay it back with interest, we're going to suffer a very real decline in our standard of living. So this huge amount of debt on all levels in the US tells us that we've been living in a fool's paradise above our means. But it's actually much worse than that, because the major export of the US for decades has been the US dollar, and it's a form of debt. Actually, it's not backed by anything, well, except for tax revenues. What it means is that when those nice Germans and Japanese get dollars and give us Sonys and Mercedes, now they have the dollars, and they actually are a form of debt. So they can take these tens of trillions of dollars that are abroad and come and trade them for real wealth, farmland, share certificates here in the US. And they will at some point, because they realize that the dollar is just a floating abstraction. It's a hot potato. So it's not just the domestic debt and the government debt, which will be indirectly defaulted on, but it's the dollar itself. exported, which is a form of debt.
Yeah, you're jumping ahead a bit, because that was actually the third of the reasons that you had listed for being pessimistic. This export of U.S. dollars overseas, and all those dollars floating around overseas. But I don't know if you're familiar with the popular theory, what's become a popular theory, that there is so much debt outside the country's borders that is denominated in dollars. So we're talking really not so much real dollars on account, but digital dollars on account, representing debt that has been created in dollars. And this theory, popularized as the milkshake theory, for example, holds that there's so much debt that needs dollars to repay it, that there's actually a deficit of dollars out there, and there will actually be a big demand, a run on dollars internationally, and that the dollar, both as a safe haven and because of this situation with dollar-denominated debt, will rise as opposed to other world currencies, and rise quite significantly, especially in the initial phases of a global economic crisis.
That's a good point, Brian, and I agree, because when you have debt and it's denominated in dollars, which is something like 70%, 80% of the debt in the world is supposed to be denominated in dollars, to pay to service the debt and pay it off, you need dollars. So there's a demand for dollars to pay that huge amount of debt off. So you sell other things. You sell stocks, you sell bonds to get dollars to pay the debt off. So yes, it's a paradox, actually, that the dollar has been strong in the face of their creating trillions more of it. It is a paradox, but it's just a temporary thing. They're going to destroy the dollar. There's no way out of this.
Yeah, and that's the way I look at it. It is such a paradox and such a complex situation that I don't know that anyone can really figure out all the details of the precise path we're going to travel. I know a lot of traders would like to try and figure that out, but I don't know that it's possible. And I think it's a valid theory. I think a lot of these are valid theories. And I guess I'm just smart enough to know that no matter what happens, you're going to want to own gold, silver, and the derivatives on the precious metals and things, tangible assets that are going to benefit, that are going to be the eventual winners in all of this.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct, because nobody wants all the 75% of the people in the world deal with their local currencies, things like dirhams and kwaches and pulas. They're worth little within those countries and nothing outside of the countries. They all want dollars, which is the international currency. But increasingly, they're not going to want dollars. Certainly the Russians and the Chinese, two big players, don't want dollars. They've got too many. And they don't want to use dollars. They have to use dollars to trade between themselves, because they don't want to. The Chinese don't want to have rubles. That's a piece of toilet paper, and vice versa. So the whole world is going to go back to gold, just out of necessity. But in order for that to happen, I think it's going to have to be at a much higher level than it is now. As shocking as that is, it's not like gold is cheap at $1,700. We both remember it when it was $35 an ounce. And there were fools out there, probably even Elliot Janeway, who probably spoke in New Orleans many years ago, said, if the U.S. didn't maintain the price of gold at $35, it would fall to $8 an ounce. So there's all kinds of opinions out there. I think gold's going up. And gold mining stocks, very, very cheap. And they're all very profitable, the producers.
Yeah.
And at some point, fund managers who don't own any of these things, because they've been brought up to believe in economic claptrap, they're going to, and to hate gold, disregard it, like Warren Buffett, for instance, perfect example. They're going to pile in to these mining stocks. And Warren Buffett is right. Mining, you can't invest in mining. It's a speculative industry. It's a crappy industry, crappy business. But they're going to pile into it. So we're going to have a gigantic run in these things. During the 70s, people don't remember this stuff. During the 70s and the 80s, there were bull markets in mining stocks where they would all, as a group, go 10 to 1. And not over the course of a lifetime. I'm talking over 3 or 4 years. It's going to happen again.
The Gold Newsletter podcast is proudly sponsored by the Discovery Group of Exploration and Development Companies. To learn more about our exceptional track record and exciting future, visit discoverygroup.ca.
Hello, listeners. I am Daniel Duarte, and as every week, we are doing our segment with the Discovery Group, which is a proud sponsor of the Gold Newsletter podcast. In each episode, we get to know more about a company within the group, and this week, I'm pleased to have with me again Claudia Tornquist. She is President and CEO of Kodiak Copper, formerly known as the Knitting Ventures. The company has a portfolio of 100% owned copper porphyry projects in Canada and the United States. And Kodiak Copper is listed on the TSX Venture Exchange with the ticker symbol KDK. Claudia, welcome back.
Hello, Daniel. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
No problem. In our last call, you explained how your company keeps advancing its project in British Columbia, MPD. What is the current status of that project, and how are social distancing measures in the region affecting the project or not?
The social distancing measures, very fortunately, are not affecting our work much at all. It's actually pretty much business as usual at Kodiak. We are exploring our MPD project in southern BC, which is just a 3 hours drive from Vancouver, very accessible. We can work fully with the local workforce, so I'm not impacted by any travel restrictions or the like, and so are progressing with our exploration as planned. We have commenced about a month ago, have just completed the first stage of the exploration program, which is the airborne geophysical survey, and are ramping up now, gearing up for our drill program, which will commence in June and should be very exciting. We'll follow up in that drill program on our discovery that we announced earlier in the year.
Great. So you are a copper-focused company, and you joined a webinar recently with a panel of experts to discuss the state of this mineral in 2020. Do you have any consensus that emerged from that event that you would like to share?
Well, look, the copper market has been pummeled by COVID, like most other commodities markets.
Right.
And it's certainly been a difficult time over the last couple of weeks. The copper price had quite some momentum going into this year and went up to $2.80 per pound. And then from there took a dive to almost $2, to the $2 level. And now over the last couple of weeks, we've seen it climb up steadily to over $2.40 per pound now, which is a move in the right direction. I am sure it'll be a rocky road. Obviously, the virus situation has very severe economic impacts, and there will be volatility going forward. But the long-term picture for copper is the same. There is a lot of copper demand coming from all those green technologies from the green revolution, and there isn't really the supply to fill that demand. And this gap, that's really what makes copper a very interesting commodity to be in. And yeah, in the short term, it will be a rocky road, but really looking out a bit further in the future, there is a lot of copper needed in this world. And higher copper prices, significantly higher copper prices to make that supply come on.
Indeed, and it seems that some countries opening up or easing lockdowns are driving some sort of momentum recently, with China notably. What are the main drivers of copper prices in the short and the long term that you're seeing?
Well, the biggest and most important driver at this time are all the infrastructure investments. Infrastructure accounts for 50% of the copper market. And if you look at all the stimuli and all the programs that the governments put in place, there are packages worth over $10 trillion around the world that various different governments put in place, and much of that will go into infrastructure building. That's how governments stimulate the economy after crisis events such as this virus. So we'll see a lot of infrastructure investments around the world, and a lot of that will require copper, and so should be very positive for the copper price.
Well, we are going to keep a close eye on the developments of the copper market. And Claudia, thank you so much for your time today again.
Thank you, Daniel.
Yeah, and that brings up, you bring up the 70s, and it brings up the third of your reasons for pessimism that you had listed, and that's inflation. And people don't understand inflation. We haven't had it for so long. We expected it after that post-2008 policy response with QE 1, 2, and 3 and zero interest rates, et cetera. But that monetary inflation was contained within the financial system because it was a financial crisis. This policy response seems much more aimed for Main Street as opposed to Wall Street. I mean, we're talking literal, or I guess still figurative, but figuratively literal helicopter money where you have direct deposit. You don't need the helicopter. You just direct deposit right into people's bank accounts. So, you know, this, I think, will bring about finally that retail price inflation once we get past, you know, this demand and destruction that we've seen.
Yes, we actually live in bizarro world now.
Right.
And helicopter money, which everybody thought was a joke, is turning into being reality. Yeah, this is absolutely fascinating to watch what's happening. You know, I play poker, and sometimes when a player is losing a lot and getting desperate and maybe having a couple of drinks, he goes on it's called going on tilt. And actually, the US government has gone on tilt, where every kind of crazy idea that's ever been put forward in the past, guaranteed annual income, I mean, it's not a question of even creating millions, not even billions, not even hundreds of billions. They're creating trillions, and now they're talking about creating another $1 trillion to bail out the local governments. We're all going to go bankrupt because people can't pay their real estate taxes. There's no more sales tax in their local income. You know, the local governments are all bust too. So this is going to get totally out of control.
Yeah, I've been talking about that in a lot of my interviews recently. And, you know, you look back on it in pre-2008, so much of what has become accepted now, quantitative easing, zero interest rate policies, negative interest rates, all of this was crazy talk back then. And now crazy talk has become normalized. And it's not only that, it's become a bidding war. Who can come up with the craziest idea? Who can up the ante, as it were? The first CARES Act in Congress was $2 trillion. The House just put forth a bill that's $3.5 trillion. And that's where the bidding's starting on this next round.
Yes. Listen, in Barron's, which used to be, I think it's the oldest financial magazine in the country, and it used to be the highest quality back in the old days. But now, in last week's edition, they published an article by some goofball, but he's a big deal economist, quote unquote. And he actually wrote in his article that the US government should pay everybody's utility bills. That's to say water, electricity, and phone bills. Because he says, if people can't pay those things, look at the consequences. They're going to freeze to death. So they got to be paid. Only the government can pay it because they're all bankrupt. So this is an article in a leading a serious article, where now the government's going to pay everything for you. And who knows, maybe your mortgage, because you can't have people kicked out and living under bridges. There's no end to this now. The distortions in the system are just being unwound. This is the, you know, Brian, people thought when I spoke at your conference in New Orleans that when this thing came unglued, it wasn't just going to be the biggest thing since the unpleasantness of 1929 to 1946. I said, this is going to be the biggest thing since the Industrial Revolution as far as overturning the way things work. And it will be.
Yeah, it's amazing that perhaps the craziest thing to come out of all of this is that 𝗀𝗏𝗀𝗁 will become known as not a master of hyperbole, but a master of understatement.
Well, listen, since very few people understand economics, so trying to give people an education in the way the world works, which is a definition of economics, is a waste of time. So to amuse myself, I like to think of myself as being in the entertainment business. So if you're going to entertain people, yes, you sometimes have to say shocking things, but I never say anything that I don't believe in, and I try not to ever say anything that I can't defend logically and rationally and at length. I don't care if it's radical sounding. If it's true, who cares?
And you do, and to give people a little bit of a peek behind the curtain, every year in New Orleans, you really work hard on your presentation, and you're very concerned about how it's going to go over and what you're going to say, and does it make rational sense. And afterwards, you invariably ask me, how did it go over? And if I tell you that 50% of the people hated it and 50% of the people absolutely loved it, you say, perfect. That's just what you wanted.
Yes, because if you say something that nobody reacts to, you're not saying anything new, or you're not saying anything different. So, yeah, that's right. But listen, we're just talking. It's all talk. And meanwhile, there's stuff that's going to be happening out there. I mean, the consequences of this little pin that broke the giant bubble, in many ways, they're going to be unpredictable, because this isn't just happening in the US, where the disaster is obvious. This is happening all over the world. I mean, they've locked people down in India, where a lot of them live on $2 a day and they can't leave their mud huts. Are they going to starve to death? I don't know.
No transportation for a while, starving. Yeah, it was amazing. And again, we see this rise of authoritarianism as governments use this crisis to crack down and seize new powers.
But I'm not optimistic that there's definitely going to be pushback, right? Because people are inconvenienced and so forth. Yeah, that's the reason they'll push back. But I'm afraid that when the going gets tough, people show their basic nature. You know, we're kind of like chimpanzees, sadly. And when it looks like we're being attacked by an outside force, whether that's another tribe or whether it's something like this phony virus, people want a leader to show them what to do and to organize them and to fight back. So I'm afraid things are going to get worse. And in this coming election in November, God, I don't know. I actually don't know who's going to win. None of the choices are good, but the one in 2024 is going to be the real turning point. I'll guess that both the Republican and the Democratic parties, I suppose they'll still exist. I mean, they could go the way of the Federalists and the Whigs, for all I know, by then. But I'll make a bet that one or both parties run a general, because the only institution left in America, or excuse me, the US, that people trust is the military, which is really a dangerous thing, because the military is really just the post office, a heavily armed version of the post office. You know, and the Pentagon's like a giant Department of Motor Vehicles, actually. But I'll bet we're going to get some generals. And that's, listen, this is not going to go away when they open up the local McDonald's. It's not going to be V-shaped. It's not going to be back to normal. None of that. Forget it.
Well, Doug, let's turn it to a more personal level. What are you up to these days during this pandemic? Where are you? Are you staying safe? Are you secure? What are you doing to get ready for what's coming?
Well, I always believe in eating my own cooking. And where I am at this moment is I bought a 1,000-acre estancia near the beach in Uruguay, a backward, quiet little country, which is fine. You want backward and quiet in a time of chaos. Close to the beach, got a mile of riverfront. I got lots of cattle. I got chickens. I got all this stuff here. And local employees that it's hard to believe anybody loves me, but I think they at least like me. And they know how to milk the cows. So that's where I am. And what am I doing with my time? As we speak, I'm completing the third of my series of 7 novels.
Oh, beautiful.
This one's Assassin, where our hero decides there are some people that just need killing. So it's an examination of the morality and the history, revisionist history, if you will, and the efficacy of political assassinations. So that's what I'm doing, and certainly it's going to be available by the time I see you in New Orleans this fall.
Wonderful, wonderful.
That's what I'm doing.
Are you buying any gold, silver, mining stocks?
I am. This is the time to back up the truck for mining stocks because gold hit its last peak in 2011. It's been going down now for 9 years. Well, 8 years anyway. As of a couple of years ago, it turned the corner. The mining stocks are still in the dumpster. They're very cheap. And most people aren't aware of the fact that the average all-in sustaining cost, which is the broadest definition of cost, is about $1,000 an ounce. Gold is $1,700 and going higher. Fund managers are going to pile into these things. So yeah, I'm buying these things with extra money that I have and buying lots of gold coins. I don't know what I'm going to do with them all. I mean, I hope at some point when Time magazine, Slime magazine, if it still exists, has a picture of a golden bull tearing apart the New York Stock Exchange on its front cover. At that point, I'd like to imagine I'm going to sell everything I've got with gold and buy the Dow Jones or the S&P or something like that. So that's the way I think it'll work out.
I do remember, Doug, one time at the New Orleans conference, I think it was the mid-90s, right at the peak of that mini bull market, you walked out on our stage for a panel and you were wearing a Spotted Owl t-shirt, you had a cigar and a glass of whiskey. And you said you were trying to duplicate the alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, but we wouldn't let you up there with your gun. Somebody asked you, what are you doing in the market right now? And you said, I've been up in my room hitting the bid on everything. And of course, our conference at the time is full of mining stocks in the exhibit hall. And that was the big buzz of the conference, that Doug's selling everything. And it turned out to be right at the top of that mini bull market. So you've always had that instinctive knowledge of when to buy and when to sell. And you make a great point too, that this is the time to back up the truck. I've been telling people in Gold Newsletter, as of a couple of months ago, we started back in the market in March when everything was selling for really, had just been decimated. And a lot of those stocks we recommended back then are up 2 or 3 times. And people feel, and I do as well, damn, I should have bought more, but missed the boat. But if you go back and you look at where, the stocks that are selling for 15, 20, 30 cents right now, the default value for those stocks is going to be $1.50, $2, $3 in a few years if we have the same kind of move that we had, say, in the early 2000s or going back to the 1970s. So the move has just begun. We're barely into the first inning here, in my opinion.
Oh, I totally agree with you. This is going to be very, very exciting. All the commodities are very cheap right now. It's not just gold. Gold, miners are profitable with gold, but copper miners, it's a rare one that's making any money. Same thing for basically all the metals miners are, in fact, farmers aren't making any money. Hog farmers are losing their shirts in the US, even at 60 cents a pound, which is what they're currently trading at. Can't make any money on cattle, can't make any money on corn or soybeans. So all the commodities are cheap, and they've been in a long bear market too. So no, this is going to be quite explosive and quite chaotic and scary. It's going to be scary. And you know, one of the problems, Brian, with are saying things like this is that people are going to blame prophets of doom. They're going to blame the Depression on prophets of doom. They're going to say, you destroyed confidence, and that's why we have a depression. And of course, that's a ridiculous argument, because if the economy rests on nothing more than confidence, which will blow away like a pile of feathers in a hurricane, but the timing of this virus is perfect from the point of view of the bad guys, because when the economy totally collapses, they'll say, hey, it wasn't our fault for fractional reserve banking and printing up money and all the other things, stupid things the government does. It was the fault of the virus. It was a deus ex machina. So it's just perverse, actually. We'll get blamed. The virus will get blamed. They won't get blamed.
Right.
And people will, and the average 𝗬𝗵𝗁 will go to them looking for further solutions, and they'll have them. So it's perverse.
Absolutely. They'll use this as the excuse to seize ever more power, as they're doing, as we see.
As they are, as we speak.
Right. And I'll just note, as we wrap up there, Doug, we've gone over the half hour, but thank you for your time. Your books are Speculator, Drug Lord, and the next one is Assassin. I've read the first two, and I'm a big fan of. I've written reviews of both, and you can find those at highgroundseries.com. That's highgroundseries.com, and Doug's other website is internationalman.com. You can also follow him on LinkedIn. He's not a big social media man, but I do see posts from you there. So LinkedIn is the place to go, apparently. Otherwise, Doug, any final remarks before we let you go?
Yeah, I love both of you guys, but I'm not going to tell you to stay safe, because I'd just be adding to this ridiculous hysteria that we're all involved in right now.
Hey,
so go out in the sun and live, live life like it should be lived, just normal, and hope that a cop doesn't bust you and throw you in jail for acting like a human being.
I'm right with you, mate, and I'll see you in New Orleans in a few months.
I appreciate the sentiment, Doug. You keep on being you.